So City 2.0, we'll see that there's a wide range of meanings connected to this concept this evening. But for us in Wonderland, this means actually connecting people together and bringing change in our cities. And especially focusing on those spaces that somehow remain forgotten in change, such as ex-industrial sites, rather than underused public spaces. And we do this by a wide range of activities, among which Project Space, which is a collaborative planning workshop, where we invite international experts from around Europe to come together and work and thinking what to do to bring local change. And this is because we believe that by exchanging knowledge and expertise internationally, we both bring enrichment on a personal level, but also to the city. And we've been doing this now for 11 years. And in this time, we've actually seen quite a shift in the role of the profession.
And basically, the change in the role of the profession also corresponds to the change of the role of the architects, the role that architects give to themselves. And this shift in the role of the architect corresponds quite much with the economic crisis, which on the one hand showed how speculation-based funding schemes are unsustainable, but also on the other hand it showed that traditional development methods are not able to tackle more complex, more complicated, unconventional urban problems. On the other hand, we also saw the economic crisis basically depriving a lot of architects from their jobs, thus forcing them to venture into neighboring fields of architecture, starting to work on graphic design, as you see on this graphic that we created a few years ago after research. They work in graphic design, in publishing, in teaching. And throughout these new competencies that they gain, they also develop new skills that they brought back into the architecture field. So through these transformations, the architecture field itself gained a lot of complexity and a diversity of approaches which these architects are using now to tackle, again, urban problems. Now, what is the role of the architect of all these processes? And as architects started to look themselves less as, let's say, the designers of pretty objects, but more as conceivers of processes, they also started to think about their product less as, like, let's say, finished products or plans, but more as an engagement with social and economic processes in the unfinished city. Now, the architects can enter into these, let's say, planning or design processes in a variety of ways. They can be initiators of communication campaigns. They can initiate interventions in the space. They can do temporary installations. They can prepare programs of temporary use. By all means, these are more complex roles than the traditional, purely design approach that the architects would give to themselves.
So we have interdisciplinary professionals and we have a wide range of stakeholders, but somehow they don't blend together immediately. So within this process, we have foreseen three main phases. One is what we call share and communicate, and this really means to involve the stakeholders, the citizens, in trying to share with them and trying to create awareness about what the problems or what the issues locally are. And if this happens, then there is a good basis for starting what we call test and intervene, which is a prototype phase. This is really going on site, doing something, creating an event, building a prototype, building an installation, and seeing what happens. And what is really important in this phase is actually mistake. So failure is essential because this is what makes us see whether it is working or if it isn't. And if it isn't, then we can improve it in trying to get into what is the next phase, which is actually what we would like to have, is more of a durable change in a more resilient manner. But how does this actually work in practice?
In the project spaces we organize, we try to bring these experimentations in dialogue with the city, official city planning, because we realize that, let's say, in the last few years, these experiments are entering more and more in the mainstream field of planning, meaning that the institutions start to accept these experiments as valuable methods. Now, what we do with project spaces, often we try to encourage this process. We embrace this devolution. So we bring these experiments basically to the attention of the city planners. We link these different kinds of actors so that basically there's a fresh look in urban planning. Now, what we did in Cluj, for example, 2 years ago, we were invited by an NGO that wanted us to cooperate in thinking about the future of an area like an industrial strip that was broadly perceived as, let's say, a barrier separating the city in two different parts. Without basically anyone really tackling this territory as a potential, we made an international call, as we usually do in the project spaces. We chose a few teams that came with us to Cluj to work with us and local experts on this territory. And what happened is that the participating teams decided that instead of doing designs and doing a plan for the development, they would rather engage with a communication campaign, because they saw communication as the key tool here to change the perception of the whole territory. So what they did, they launched a communication campaign organized around a series of postcards that would highlight the potentials of the area that nobody really paid attention to before, like the architectural heritage of the site, also the mushrooming little businesses that could be seen, according to them, as a model for the further development of the area, and also the peculiar position of this site between existing industries and existing universities, so that this territory could act as an interface between these functions that could be connected. Now, what happened with this communication campaign is that architects actually behaved or took up the role more as mediators or communicators than actually designers, but they managed to engage a lot of public to send these postcards to the municipalities, and thus also engaging the municipality to look at this territory in a different way.
Then, about a year ago, we were invited in Mannheim in Germany. Some of you may know that the American military forces will leave the barracks in many of the cities in Germany. And in the case of Mannheim, this is quite a big challenge and a very big opportunity, because there is approximately 500 hectares available. And this is why, since already many years, the city administration, together with a whole wide range of local NGOs, has been developing a big participation process around the concept of the reconversion, to really rethink how Mannheim could be in the future. And this is why we were invited, together with Spanish, French, and German teams, to work together and develop a prototype for the special occasion of creating events with the citizens around the concept of the House of Citizens that would be in one of the barracks, very central in the city. And this is when we developed a prototype of a series of interactive activities and games, if you like, that could help then people that also are not necessarily coming from a design and architectural planning background to work together and start looking at how things could work and how the space could work and what functions there could be and how it could interact with the surrounding. And what happened was the fact that the prototype worked quite well. And there were mistakes that were then reinserted in the future process. And this opened for us a discussion concerning the concept of durability.
Durability, for which Budapest workshop we organized, was a very good example, in the sense that it really incited architects, again, not to think about a particular design or a concept for a territory, but they engaged them to design the process itself. So we were again invited by an NGO to Budapest to think together about the problem of vacancy that in the last few years became a serious problem for the city. Basically, it reached very alarming levels in the past few years. So we were invited by this NGO, and we made an international call for contributions, from which we were trying to choose teams with very different competencies, from, let's say, teams who are experienced in designing furniture for an empty shop or an empty building, to teams that have an experience in doing public space interventions around these given empty properties, but also to teams that would be more engaged with thinking about the neighborhood in a systematic way, how to link different units, how to think about these empty properties of a neighborhood together. Now the invited teams decided again that instead of doing little design, instead of doing a proposal for design of development of the territory, they would elaborate the idea of an agency, an in-between agency that would mediate between the city and the users, or the owners of the properties and the potential users, including, let's say, for-profit and non-profit organizations in a way, that they would combine their competences, they would combine their activities, supporting each other financially and in attracting people. Now, the result of this workshop was also that when presenting this concept of the agency to the city of Budapest, the city engaged this NGO to work together with the municipality of Budapest on elaborating a long-term plan tackling the problem of vacancy.
So at this point, one may think that the game is done. We've reached durability. And that's exactly the moment when it's not true. Because that is exactly the moment when you have to restart with the information campaigns, when you have to restart going on site and creating prototypes. Because in order to really have a durable process, you constantly have to interact with the surrounding space and with the local stakeholder and see, does it actually work? And in order to have this, therefore, the three phases that we have spoken about are actually not a linear process, but rather something that is more like a spiral, like a circular process, where you constantly have to ask yourself, is it working? Now, we hope that you might like to sit around the table with us sometime and discuss about these things. And in the meantime, we would like to thank you very much.
Thank you.